There's a small detail that people close to the situation remember, and it's not the kind of detail you'd expect. It wasn't that Patricia Taylor cried. Plenty of mothers cry when they see their children on a screen for the first time. What people remember is when she stopped. There was a moment, somewhere around the midpoint of the scene, where the tears simply ceased and something else took over her face entirely, something closer to recognition. Not recognition of her son, because of course she knew her son. It was more like recognition of something she had quietly suspected about him for a long time but had never been able to name out loud. And in that darkened room, watching a version of him projected in light, she finally found it. This was the mid-1980s, Toronto. Keanu was barely into his 20s, still lean in that way young men are when they haven't quite finished becoming their adult selves. He had been doing small television work in Canada, the kind of roles that don't make headlines, the kind where your name appears low in the credits and your scenes might get trimmed in the edit, and nobody calls to tell you either way. He had been in a handful of commercials. He had done some stage work at a local theater that seated maybe 150 people if you counted the folding chairs in the back. None of it had made much noise. None of it needed to. He was learning, mostly. And he was doing what a lot of young actors do in those early years, carrying around two versions of himself. One version showed up to auditions, tried to control his nerves, read lines in rented rooms with strangers watching. The other version went home afterward, made dinner, sat with the silence, and tried to decide whether any of this was real or whether he was simply occupying space until life told him what it actually wanted from him. His mother knew both versions, though she never discussed them in those terms. Patricia Taylor was not the kind of woman who narrated emotions. She had lived a life that didn't lend itself to tidy summaries. Originally from England, she had made her way through the fashion world, specifically the rock and roll costume world, designing and constructing stage outfits for musicians whose names people still recognize today. She had an eye for fabric, for movement, for how a body communicated when it was elevated by what it wore. She understood performance, but from the other side of it. She understood the construction, the stitching, the fitting, the long hours bent over a table making something that would exist under lights for maybe 90 minutes and then be hung in a closet or forgotten on a tour bus. She knew what went into creating a moment, even if she was rarely the one standing inside it. Her relationship with Keanu had been shaped by geography and circumstance. His father had left the family when Keanu was very young, and the years that followed involved moves from Beirut to Sydney to New York and eventually to Toronto. Patricia worked. She worked constantly. There were stretches when Keanu was raised more by the rhythm of her determination than by her physical presence in a room. She wasn't absent. That would be an unfair word. But she was occupied, and occupation in a single mother often looks like distance even when it isn't. Keanu grew up understanding work as a form of devotion. He watched his mother bend over sewing machines at odd hours. He watched her pin fabric to mannequins with a focus so total it seemed almost meditative. He learned, probably without realizing it, that care doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes care is just someone in the next room, still awake, still making something. By the time he started gravitating toward acting, Patricia didn't resist it. She didn't push it either. She simply observed. When he told her about auditions, she listened. When he described scenes he'd worked on, she asked practical questions. What the set looked like, how the lighting was arranged, whether the director spoke to the actors between takes, or let them figure things out on their own. She approached his new world the way she approached fabric. She wanted to understand the structure before she commented on the finished product. The first time she saw him on screen, actually saw him in a role that had enough substance to hold attention. It happened without ceremony. It wasn't a premiere. There was no red carpet, no photographers, no publicist arranging seats. It was a private screening of sorts, arranged informally, the kind of thing that happened when a young actor got a copy of a project and wanted to watch it before it aired. Keanu had access to a rough cut, or close to it, of one of his early television appearances. The details of which project vary depending on who tells the story, and that's probably because the specific title isn't what matters. What matters is the room. It was a small room. There might have been a couch. There was almost certainly a television set that, by today's standards, would look comically modest, boxy, heavy, with a screen that gave everything a slightly warm tone, whether the scene called for it or not. Keanu had invited his mother over, not with fanfare, just a phone call, something along the lines of, "I've got the tape, do you want to come see it?" And Patricia came. What the people who were nearby at the time recall, and nearby here means maybe one or two others, a friend, possibly a roommate who was trying to be unobtrusive in the kitchen, is that Keanu was nervous, not visibly shaking or pacing or doing anything that would read as anxiety on camera. But there was a quality to his stillness that suggested effort. He was working to appear calm. He put the tape in. He sat down. He didn't sit next to his mother. He sat slightly apart, in a chair to the side, angled so that he could see the screen, but also, if he wanted to, glance at her without being obvious about it. Patricia sat with her hands in her lap. She watched the way she did everything with a kind of focused patience that didn't betray what was happening underneath. The tape played. The scene came. Keanu appeared on screen, and for a few seconds the room was just the sound of the television and the faint hum of whatever was happening in the apartment around them. He looked younger on the screen than he did in the room, the way everyone does in their early work. His face hadn't yet settled into the architecture that people would later recognize instantly. He was open, almost unguarded. And he was doing something that actors spend years trying to learn. He was listening. In the scene, he was simply listening to another character speak, and his face was doing the work. Not performing, not signaling emotion for the camera, just receiving. Just being present with another human being in a fictional circumstance and letting that be enough. That was when Patricia started to cry. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sound to it at first. One of the people in the apartment noticed only because the light from the screen caught moisture on her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't move at all. She just let it happen, the way you let rain happen when you're already outside and there's no point in running. Keanu noticed, too. He glanced over, just a glance, brief and careful, the kind of look a person gives when they want to know but don't want to intrude. He saw her face. He didn't say anything. He looked back at the screen. His jaw tightened slightly, that was all. The scene continued, and somewhere in the middle of it, the tears stopped. Not because the emotion ended, but because something shifted. Patricia's expression changed. The sadness, or whatever mix of pride and grief and memory the tears had carried, gave way to something steadier. She watched her son on that small screen with an expression that people later described as almost studious, like she was seeing not just the performance but the years behind it. The quiet kid who used to sit on the floor of her workshop while she cut fabric. The teenager who didn't always know where he fit but never made that anyone else's problem. The young man who chose a life of vulnerability, of standing in front of strangers and offering himself for evaluation, and did it without bitterness, without the sharp edges that kind of exposure often produces in people. She was seeing, perhaps, that the thing she had poured into him through all those imperfect, exhausting, geographically unstable years had actually arrived somewhere. Not the acting itself. That was his. She didn't take credit for his talent, and she wouldn't have wanted to. What she recognized was something subtler, a quality of attention. The way he listened on screen was the way she had watched him learn to listen in life. Carefully, without rushing to fill the silence. Without needing to be the loudest thing in the room. When the tape ended, the screen went to static or black, the accounts differ, and the room was quiet. Keanu didn't ask what she thought. That's a detail people mention specifically because it's unusual. Most young actors, after showing their work to someone they love, can't help but ask. The need for reassurance is almost physical, but Keanu didn't ask. He sat with the quiet. He let it exist between them without trying to resolve it. Patricia spoke first, and what she said was not a grand declaration. It wasn't "you're going to be a star" or "I'm so proud of you" or anything that would fit neatly into a screenplay. What she said, according to the best recollection available, was something close to, "You were actually there." She said it simply, almost to herself, as though she were confirming something. And then, after a pause, "You were really in it." Keanu looked at her. He nodded, not a big nod, just an acknowledgement. And then he said something that might have been thanks or might have been yeah. Something small and almost inaudible, the way words sometimes get when they have to travel through feeling to reach the surface. That was the moment. That was all of it. There was no embrace described. No long, tearful conversation about the past. No sudden healing of old wounds or resolution of complicated family history. Just a mother and a son sitting in a small room after watching something together. both understanding that something had been confirmed without needing to explain exactly what it was. In the years that followed, Keanu's career moved in directions that nobody in that room could have predicted. The roles got bigger. The stages got wider. The public discovered him, and then discovered him again, and then again, each time surprised somehow that he was still the same person underneath the accumulating fame. People would eventually write articles about his kindness, his humility, the way he sat on public benches and rode the subway and didn't seem to carry himself with the insulation that wealth and recognition usually provide. They would call him an enigma. They would call him the internet's boyfriend. They would create a mythology around his goodness, as though it were a mystery that needed solving. But if you had been in that small room in Toronto, watching Patricia Taylor watch her son listen on a television screen, you might not have found it mysterious at all. You might have seen exactly where it came from. Not from philosophy or spiritual practice or some innate saintliness, but from something much more ordinary and much harder to maintain. From being raised by someone who understood that presence is a craft. That showing up, even imperfectly, even across distances and difficulties and long nights of work, is its own form of devotion. Patricia had spent years making things with her hands for people who performed under lights. She understood the difference between spectacle and substance. And sitting in that room, she saw that her son understood it too. Keanu, for his part, has never publicly described this moment in any detailed way. He has spoken about his mother in interviews over the years, warmly, carefully, with the kind of measured affection that suggests deep feeling held at a respectful distance. He has never been the type to offer private moments for public consumption. When interviewers ask about his childhood, he answers honestly but briefly, and there's never a sense that he's withholding to be dramatic. It's more that he seems to believe some things belong to the people who lived them, and that pulling them into the light of public attention would change their shape in ways he's not willing to allow. What can be said, based on the fragments that have surfaced over the years, is that the relationship between Keanu and his mother carried the specific weight of two people who had been through instability together and come out the other side without pretending the instability hadn't happened. They didn't rewrite their history into something smooth. They let it be what it was, complicated, sometimes lonely, shaped by absences both chosen and unchosen, and they found a way to be honest inside it. That honesty is what filled the room that evening. It's what made Patricia's tears meaningful, and what made their stopping even more so. She wasn't crying because her son was on television. She was crying because she could see, in the way he inhabited a scene, that he had become someone who could be fully present with another human being. And for a mother who had spent years worrying that the fractures in their life might have taught him to withdraw, to guard himself, to treat closeness as something unreliable. Seeing him open like that, even in a fiction, even on a screen, must have felt like an answer to a question she had been carrying for a very long time. And then the tears stopped, and what replaced them was something better than relief. It was recognition, the quiet, steady recognition that he was going to be all right, not famous, not successful. Those things are external and temporary, and she knew that better than most, having spent years in an industry built on surfaces. What she recognized was something internal and durable, that her son could sit with another person, real or imagined, and simply be there. That he could listen without performing. That he could feel without broadcasting. That the years of imperfect love had somehow, against probability, produced a person capable of genuine connection. That's what she meant when she said he was really in it. She wasn't giving a review of his acting. She was describing his presence. And Keanu, hearing her, understood this. Which is why he didn't ask for more. He didn't need more. The recognition itself was enough. Years later, when people would stop him on the street and tell him they admired him, he would listen the same way he listened in that early scene, fully, without rushing, without deflecting. He would look at them and nod and sometimes say something small and sometimes say nothing at all. And either way, the person would walk away feeling that they had been, for a moment, genuinely seen. It's a rare thing, being seen like that. It's even rarer when it comes from someone who has every reason to look past you. But he had learned it early. He had learned it from a woman who made costumes in rooms no one photographed, for people who stood in lights she never shared. He had learned it from her hands, from her focus, from the quiet fact of her being there, night after night, making something that mattered even though nobody would ever know her name. Some things pass between people without being spoken. Some lessons arrive not through instruction, but through proximity, through watching someone care about their work, through noticing how they hold a pin between their teeth while adjusting a seam, through understanding that devotion has no audience requirement. Patricia Taylor gave her son many things, and not all of them were easy, and not all of them arrived on schedule. But she gave him the ability to be present. And on an unremarkable evening in a small room in Toronto, he gave it back to her. That was the exchange, unscripted, unrecorded, unrepeatable, and yet somehow in the decades since, visible in everything he does, this quiet insistence on being actually there, on being really in it, wherever it happens to be. It is perhaps the most durable inheritance a person can receive. Not wealth, not talent, not even love exactly, but attention. Real, patient, unperforming attention. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that simply sits in a chair, slightly apart, and watches, and understands, and stays.